Good morning, my time. Good afternoon, your time. It's a pleasure to be with you today to talk about a pilot study on the textual history of Ethiopic Exodus in the Beta Israel and Christian manuscript traditions. Thanks to the growth of a generous relationship between Professor Dalit Rom-Shaloni and the members of the Beta Israel community, more manuscripts of the Beta Israel community have come to light in the last few years than in previous several decades. Alongside this development of new relationships and the discovery of new manuscripts, the Textual History of the Ethiopic Old Testament project has been working to develop the methods and tools to describe the textual relationships among the manuscript copies of Ethiopic biblical books. So with fully 11 Beta Israel manuscripts and a careful selection of 32 additional Christian manuscripts, we have conducted a full-on digital humanities pilot project in which we transcribed every word of 43 manuscripts in Exodus chapters 1, 15, and 20. Let me start the screen here. We'll start watching the PowerPoint. The goal of the pilot project was to process together the 11 Beta Israel manuscripts and the 32 Christian copies and set forth a map of the manuscript clusters that emerge. We can now see the clusters into which the 32 Christian manuscripts are aligned, and we're able to identify precisely where the manuscripts of the Beta Israel community lie in relationship to these clusters. The THEOT workflow and assumptions have been under development for 13 years now, and the whole matter is complex enough that space will not allow us to give a detailed account here. Nevertheless, we have refined and applied these to 28 books of the Ethiopic Old Testament and have published a full account of the methods and findings of the project on our website, as well as in several articles. It took about 6 months to carry out the pilot project, 4 months to create the 43 transcriptions, 1 month to prepare the textual data for computer analysis, 1 month to analyze the data and write up the report. All the members of the THEOT project were involved, including the members of the ADIS transcription team and Ato Demeka. The THEOT team worked alongside the members of the Tofsi HaOrit project as we held just over 20 Zoom meetings across the last 6 months. It's just been great. We created a representative sample of Christian manuscripts to establish the textual history of the Christian Orit tradition. To produce results that would provide a higher degree of confidence, we needed at least 30 manuscripts, but these needed to be carefully selected with consideration for both chronology and geography. And you can see on the screen there those 32 manuscripts. Now, when it comes to the manuscripts of the Beta Israel Orit, we simply had to take what we could get. We were able to gain access to 11, which is a much larger sample size than has ever been available before. The sample of Beta Israel manuscripts includes the ones you see on the screen now as well. So as we mentioned above, we selected 3 chapters as our sample of the text of the book of Exodus. These were chapters 1, 15, and 20. And together, these make up about 7.5% of the book. Speak just a minute about the methods here. So patterns of shared textual variation are the key to detecting and describing textual history. At the foundation of the THEOT workflow is a process that renders textual information into a statistical form that one can measure textual affiliation with. Since shared variation is the key, we had to develop a workflow that identified exactly where the variation is. And having found the variation, we then had to quantify it in some way or another. In order to accomplish this, we lined up all the words that share the same root into the same column. We start by breaking the text into very small segments, part verses with 5 to 8 words in them. The figure on the screen shows an example. If all the manuscripts share the same word, then everything lines up and there's no variation. If there's a variation, whether a plus, a minus, a transposition, a variant between two sets of columns, some manuscripts will have a word in a column and others will not. This is key to transforming shared words into shared digits. If a word is present, we replace the word, whatever it is, with the number 2. And if there is no word present in the column for some manuscripts, then we replace the dot that is there to a number 1. This is the foundation of everything we do. No, it sounds very simple. It's a secret pathway towards quantizing the statistical relationships between the manuscripts. One of the most important products of our work is a statistical table showing the percentage agreement of all the words in all the manuscripts across the 3 chapters in our sample. All of the data necessary to sort out all the mysteries of textual history are locked within this data set. But 85% of what we do, or of what we do have, goes first and foremost to establish the fundamental uniformity of the textual tradition, not its variations. It's only the final 15% of the data points that carry the information about the shared variations. The data we are looking for, that precious information about shared variations, are buried and hidden by the 85%. Okay, so here's the dendrogram of Exodus, the most significant visual that is produced by our workflow. Um, Whenever we generate a new dendrogram, the team spends hours, indeed days, working to identify and understand the behaviors of the manuscripts and clusters. And together we formulate an interpretation of the data in the dendrogram. This interpreted form of the dendrogram functions as our working hypothesis as we move through the next steps in the workflow. Once we have the working theory of the clusters, then we can arrange the text of all those manuscripts into our THEOT text viewer. With this, we can see all the patterns of shared variation that went on in the transmission of the book of Exodus, at least in these 43 manuscripts that are in our sample. We're looking at the example of Exodus chapter 1, verse 6. Before the texts are displayed in the way that you see them here, it was impossible to see the patterns of shared variation. But now in this form, we can see these variants where they were present, um, and it just gives us all kinds of insight into the textual history in all of its particularity. Well, let's talk through a few of the findings of our about the general Ethiopic textual history. The first point to be made, and we've already said it once or so, is that 85% of the data proves the fundamental uniformity of the tradition, a tradition that includes both Christians and Beta Israel manuscripts. 85% of all the words in all the columns share the same root, regardless of whether the manuscripts are used by the Christian or Beta Israel community. Another 1 or 2%, oh yeah, sorry, we'll move on here to the next screen. Another 1 or 2% of the data prove the human frailty of scribes. When we align all the words of all the scribes into columns, we end up with 1,481 columns. But in our sample, it turns out that 593 of these columns exist because one and only one scribe put down something that none of the other 42 scribes had. We call these acts of scribal idiosyncrasy. In our sample, one manuscript was responsible for 298, or just about half of all these acts of idiosyncrasy. With a closer inspection of the content of Witness 41 in our study, EMML 7865, we quickly concluded that though the book is based on the text of the book of Exodus, it crosses genre into the domain of the so-called rewritten Bible. The remaining 14% of the data show all the evidence for variation that exists in the copies of Ethiopic Exodus. Without any intention on our part to make it turn out this way, the location of the manuscripts on the dendrogram reflects chronology. All of the old manuscripts are found on the right side of the dendrogram, highlighted in red color here, and the younger manuscripts are all concentrated on the left. Excuse me, that's not technically accurate to put it that way, but the younger manuscripts are concentrated on the left. We'll talk about why that is. It's not the chronology, though, that shaped the most powerful mechanism at work in the textual history. Instead, the single largest phenomena in the textual history of the extant manuscripts is the divide that stands between two text forms. These two text forms show in the dendrogram as two superclusters. The first of these on the right is of fork A, right here. It represents the footprint of the early text, the early form that dominated the 14th to the 16th centuries. Call this ETH1, or the earliest attested text form. The second of these, to the left, represents the footprint of the later text form, dominating the 17th to the 21st centuries, and we call this the ETH2 text form, or the standardized text. What created these two text forms? Turns out there are 5 mechanisms that create these two superclusters. We found them by searching for the answers to 4 questions. The first one is, were there minority variants in the ETH1 period? It turns out that the answer is yes. Just look through the text viewer page by page, and you learn to see their digital fingerprints. Then with a dot in a spreadsheet, we mark the ones that had that minority variance. And in another column, we describe the variant philologically. And we found fully 113 of these in just 3 chapters of our sample. Since these 3 chapters represent only 7.5% of the book, we would expect to find over 1,500 of these ETH1 minority variants in the whole book. Now, answer this question. What happened to each of these ETH1 minority variants in the ETH2 period? So in the younger, from the 17th to the 21st century. Well, when the editors in the government scriptoria of the 17th century started creating a revision of their old text form, they had to make decisions about those minority variants being offered up by the old manuscripts. We went through the same spreadsheet and put dots in all the ETH2 manuscripts that had the minority variant from the ETH1 period. So that's these dots here. Almost immediately, we could see that the editors of the standardized version decided to eliminate some of the old variants entirely from the tradition. These are the places where there are no dots in the ETH2 manuscript columns. That would be these here. Those got eliminated. And that is the second That's the second mechanism at work in the textual history, the elimination of some of the minority variants from the past. The third mechanism is like unto the second. Some of the ETH1 minority variants were elevated to become the main reading of the Bible. We can see these in the spreadsheet where all of the ETH2 manuscripts record a dot, making it clear that that variant was taken up virtually across the board in the 17th century. So all these ones that have dots right across, these are the ones that were elevated from what they had been minorities in the ETH1 period. So these mechanisms, and we found, the final mechanism at work in Ethiopia's textual history is the answer to the question, were there any places in the earliest attested text form where the 17th century editors didn't like either of the 2 variants at a particular point, and they eliminated them both and then created an entirely new reading in the 17th century? And the answer to this is a resounding yes. We found 53 of these in our sample of just the three chapters, uh, indicating there are likely to be more than 700 of these in the entire book. So these mechanisms comprise the editorial strategy of the standardized text. In fact, the data are univocal about this. Listen carefully. This is one of our strongest claims here. There are no data in the data set that are not addressed by one or the other of those mechanisms, and there are no data beyond these data points. The phenomena of shared variation in the manuscripts are explained completely by the theory that the editorial strategies of the standardized text involved either eliminating or elevating minority variants from the ETH1 period, or in rejecting both and in creating an entirely new reading. The greatest mystery surrounding the textual history of the Ethiopic Old Testament has to do with the causes of the change from the ETH1 to the ETH2 period. Ethiopia goes into the 16th century with one text type. By the first quarter of the 17th century, a new text type is established and well on its way to claiming demographic hegemony. Though historians are aware of a set of extraordinary events and movements in the 16th century in Ethiopia, nevertheless, we have yet to hear of a compelling evidence for just how any one of these or combination of these might have brought about the revision of the Ethiopian Bible. There are 9 late copies of the earliest attested text form, and they bear witness to a fascinating movement of social resistance, shall we say, among Christians and Beta Israel alike. All of these were copied between the 17th and the 20th centuries, exactly during the time when the standardized text form had taken over the center of the transmission history. That means that these manuscripts bear witness to a perspective that valued conserving the traditional readings. This sentiment apparently created a continuing demand for copies of the old text form. So with that background now about the general picture, let's look at our specific findings related to the Beta Israel manuscripts. The textual history of the Ethiopic book of Exodus uh, is one of, sorry, let me start again. The textual history of the Ethiopic book of Exodus is one textual history shared by the manuscripts of both Beta Israel and Christian communities. As we were nearing the moment when we would run the dendrogram and see the movements in textual history, we paused our work and asked ourselves the following pointed questions. What were the possibilities we might see in the dendrogram? Number 2, what did we hope to see? And 3, why did we hope to see it? Well, one of the possibilities was that all the Christian manuscripts would cluster together on one side of the dendrogram, and all the Beta Israel manuscripts would cluster together on the other side of the dendrogram. The opposite possibility was that all the Beta Israel manuscripts would be subsumed in and among those Christian manuscripts in no discernibly distinct way. Well, then we ran the dendrogram, and we learned the facts. The purple triangles in this dendrogram represent the Beta Israel manuscripts. Now, we definitely do not see all the Beta Israel manuscripts clustering together over against the Christian ones. So if we were hasty at that moment, we might have concluded the opposite must be true. All the Beta Israel manuscripts are subsumed in and among the Christian manuscripts. But this is not right. While it is true that the textual histories of the two communities are closely related, it's not accurate to say the Beit Israel manuscripts are merely subsumed by Christian manuscripts. First, we already noticed that EMML 7865 is not a biblical manuscript in the narrow technical sense, so we set it aside. Second, we noticed that 8 of the remaining 10 Beta Israel manuscripts align with one form or another of the earliest attested text form. That's all of these over here. This is our first observation. The Beta Israel community appears to be among those that prefer the earliest attested text form of the Ethiopic tradition. But this does not perhaps say it strongly enough. Even the two Beta Israel manuscripts that are among the Stan MTR cluster over here, these two right here, um, uh, these are ones that are the furthest away from the center of Christian manuscript tradition in that 20th to 21st centuries. The Beta Israel community appears to be resistant to using the form of the text in use by Christians. In fact, we can say that the dendrogram appears to suggest that for the last 400 years, the Beta Israel community has used the text form of the book of Exodus that is furthest away from the mainstream of Christian tradition, the standardized and modern Textus Receptus forms of the Christian textual tradition. But now, even with this strong statement, we have to return to the first claim we made. Ethiopic textual tradition is very uniform one. The two communities have distinct forms of the text that they prefer, and they appear to be committed to them, but the substance of the two are nearly identical. Well, finally, we would say a word or two about for future study. Uh, Others, we hope, will be able to carry out this investigation even further. It will really help when we have more Beta Israel manuscripts to add to our numbers. We need 30 copies of the Beta Israel manuscripts, just those alone, in order to be able to draw reliable conclusions about what is going on. It'd be wonderful to learn more about the Beta Israel community and its pursuit of a text that aligned with the needs and standards of their tradition. And I have to say in closing, it's been a great honor to work closely with Professor Dalit and her magnificent students. I thank each of you, Kesmulu Alam, Gadi, Moti, Nava, Salamawi, Tomar, Tamar, for this wonderful experience. You've been generous to me and opened your arms to me and welcomed me into your these discussions. So I thank you. And I hope that you remain encouraged and productive in your work. Thank you.